At Lancaster Enterprises, the atmosphere was unusually tense that morning. The typically bustling hallways were filled with hushed whispers and curious glances. "Did you hear?" one of the administrative staff murmured. "Yeah," another replied. "Ethan Lancaster just hired a new assistant. Does she know about the rule?" "Doubt it. This is going to be a disaster." The rule was simple but unyielding. Ethan Lancaster never touched women. No handshakes, no accidental brushes, nothing. Over the years, female employees had grown accustomed to this oddity. Some chalked it up to billionaire eccentricity, while others speculated about some deep, mysterious trauma. Either way, no one dared to get too close. But Natalie Carter, the newly hired personal assistant, had no idea about any of this. It was her first day, and she couldn't understand why the air felt so thick with unspoken tension. People looked at her with a strange mix of pity and curiosity, as if she were stepping into a lion's den without realizing it. "Carter?" Emma Reynolds, the executive secretary, called out urgently. "Mr. Lancaster needs a tie. Grab one and take it to him now." Natalie blinked. "Wait, what? A tie, Carter? He has a meeting in 10 minutes. Hurry." "Okay, just a tie. No big deal," she mumbled. How hard could it be? She quickly made her way to the executive dressing room and opened the cabinet where Ethan's ties were stored. And that's when she hit a minor obstacle. There were at least 50 of them. "All right, what color would a cold, untouchable CEO wear?" she muttered. "Navy blue? Black? Gray?" She hesitated, then panicked and grabbed them all. Arms full of expensive silk, she marched toward the CEO's office. The plan was simple. Walk in, hand him the tie, and leave. She knocked. "Come in." Taking a deep breath, Natalie stepped inside. Ethan Lancaster stood by his desk, adjusting the cuffs of his crisp white shirt, wearing the look of someone who had already solved a $1 million problem before breakfast. He glanced up and frowned. "What is that?" "Ties," she answered, stopping in front of him. "All of them?" "I didn't know which color you preferred, so I brought them all." For a moment he just stared at her before exhaling, as if summoning patience he barely had. "Give me one." Natalie dumped the pile onto his desk and blindly grabbed one to hand to him. Ethan arched an eyebrow. "A patterned one?" She glanced at the tie and realized, oh no. In her rush, she had picked it was covered in tiny rubber duck prints. Natalie's eyes widened in horror. Oh no, definitely not that one. She quickly yanked it back. "Not that one. Wait." She grabbed another and handed it over. "Navy blue." Ethan gave a brief nod of acknowledgement. Natalie let out a breath, relieved. Mission accomplished. Now all she had to do was quietly walk out and wait. She froze. Ethan was tying his tie completely wrong. She blinked, then blinked again. He was absolutely wrecking that poor piece of fabric, twisting and knotting it like he was trying to strangle an invisible ghost. This is a crime against corporate fashion, she thought, an uncontrollable urge rising within her. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward, lifted her hands, and, "Wait, you're doing it wrong. Let me?" Her fingers brushed against the skin of his neck. Ethan went completely still. Natalie felt his muscles tense beneath her touch. The shift in the air was almost visible. Then suddenly, no. Ethan jerked backward like he'd been electrocuted. Natalie's eyes widened. "Oh my God, what happened?" Ethan stared at her like she'd just tried to assassinate him. "You touched me." Yeah? I was just fixing your tie." She frowned. That was an overreaction if she'd ever seen one. "Never do that again." "Okay, relax. I'm not radioactive, you know." Ethan ran a hand over his neck as if trying to scrub away the feeling of her touch. His breathing was uneven and his gaze remained locked on her, something dark and tormented flickering in his eyes. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight. "Then make me understand," Natalie shot back, crossing her arms. "Because honestly, this makes no sense at all." His fists clenched at his sides as if he was wrestling with something deep inside himself. "I can't be touched." "What do you mean can't?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Do you like explode, turn into a frog?" "This is not a joke." His tone was raw, desperate. Natalie fell silent. Whatever this was, it was real. He was genuinely shaken. Ethan looked away, his jaw tight. "Just don't do it again." She hesitated, unsure of what to say. She had never seen someone react so badly to something as simple as a touch. But as she studied his face, she saw something beyond anger. Fear. Real, tangible fear. Letting out a small sigh, she raised her hands in surrender. "All right, I won't touch you again." Ethan's shoulders relaxed, just slightly. but his entire body still radiated tension. "You can go." Natalie rolled her eyes. "Fine, boss, no touching. But one day I'm gonna figure out what's so scary about it." Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heel and hurried out of the office, completely clueless about what had just happened. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand over the spot where she had touched him. His heart was still hammering in his chest. This had never happened before. But for some inexplicable reason, her touch still lingered. And that changed everything. The entire office was a sea of curious stares as Natalie walked out, her face slightly flushed, her expression utterly baffled. What the hell was that? Ethan Lancaster had reacted to her touch like she'd put a curse on him. Dramatic. That was the only word that came to her mind. Shaking her head, she made her way to her desk and dropped into her chair, rubbing her temples. Her first day was already starting to feel like a disaster. "So, you survived." Natalie looked up to see Max Turner, the head of the finance department, stood beside Natalie, sipping his ever-present cup of coffee. Max Turner was in his mid-30s, a man who always carried himself like he had seen it all in this company, because, honestly, he probably had. "What do you mean by survived?" Natalie frowned. Max leaned casually against her desk, taking another sip. "No one touches Ethan. Ever." Natalie blinked. "Okay, this is getting weird. Why not?" "Because he just can't stand it. He has this rule, no woman can touch him." She let out an exasperated huff. "Well, he could have at least warned me before having a full-on meltdown, right?" Max suddenly froze. His eyes widened. "Wait a second. You touched him?" "Technically, yes, but it was his fault. He was butchering his tie, and my need for order took over. So I just fixed it." Max stared at her as if she had just spilled coffee on the U.S. Constitution. "You put your hands on him?" "I just fixed his tie." Max let out a laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "Congratulations, Carter. You just broke 20 years of protocol." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. No one dies from an accidental touch." Little did she know. Inside his office, Ethan Lancaster sat completely unsettled. His eyes were fixed on the report open on his computer screen, but none of the numbers made sense. The charts, the spreadsheets, the market forecasts, everything looked like gibberish. And all because of what? A single touch. He ran his fingers along the collar of his shirt, where his tie still sat perfectly in place. That's what unnerved him the most. He should have felt uncomfortable, disgusted, anxious, but he didn't. Worse, he didn't feel anything bad at all. And that terrified him. The last time someone had touched him like that had been 20 years ago. It had been a disaster. Since then, his body had learned to reject any kind of physical contact from a woman. So why was Natalie different? With a sharp breath, Ethan abruptly stood, pushing his chair back as he walked toward the glass wall overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at him. A man who, for the first time in years, didn't understand himself. This had to be a coincidence, an exception. He needed to test it. 2 hours later, Natalie was deep into a report when the phone on her desk buzzed. Ethan Lancaster's office, his secretary's voice came through. "Mr. Lancaster wants to see you." She froze. "Again?" "Yes, and bring the report from the investor meeting. He wants you to hand it to him directly." Natalie raised an eyebrow but grabbed the papers and made her way to his office. When she entered, Ethan was standing behind his desk, his expression unreadable as always. "Here's the report, Mr. Lancaster," she said, stepping forward. Ethan reached out his hand. She hesitated. This guy had freaked out a few hours ago just because she touched him, and now he was reaching for something directly from her hands? Still, she extended the papers toward him. And then it happened. The moment Ethan's fingers brushed against hers, his body tensed again. It was quick, subtle, imperceptible to any outside observer. But inside him it felt like worlds colliding. Again, a shock ran through his nerves. His heart skipped a beat. Trying to play it off, he grabbed the papers too quickly, causing one of the sheets to slip and flutter to the floor. Damn. Out of reflex, Natalie bent down to pick it up, but just as Natalie stood up, Ethan bent down at the same time. The result? Forehead to forehead. It was a light bump, but enough to freeze them both in an awkward silence. His face was way too close to hers. Natalie bit back a laugh. If this was some kind of reflex test, congratulations. You passed. Ethan cleared his throat, straightening up and quickly gathering the papers. That wasn't a test. Oh sure, she said, grinning. Bumping heads is a great work method. He didn't respond. Instead, he simply turned back to his desk, pretending like nothing had happened. Natalie crossed her arms. Mr. Lancaster? Yes? Are you nervous? He looked at her with his usual calculated coldness. I don't get nervous, she smirked. Then you won't mind if I do this. Raising her hand slightly, she pretended she was about to touch him again. Ethan took a step back so fast he nearly tripped over his chair. Silence. Natalie burst out laughing. Wow, for someone who never gets nervous, that was a pretty dramatic reaction. Ethan shot her a sharp glare. That's enough for today. You can leave. Still chuckling to herself, Natalie walked out of his office while Ethan, for the first time in years, had no idea how to handle the situation. She was a problem. And worse, he was starting to like it. Ethan Lancaster was officially lost. After the tie incident and that cursed report that had forced him to touch Natalie Carter's fingers, he could no longer ignore her presence, and that irritated him deeply. For 20 years, no one had broken his personal barrier. He had kept his distance, avoided any physical contact with women, and it had never been an issue. If anything, it had been a firm rule, a well-structured system that gave him control over everything. But then Natalie showed up. She was different from any assistant he'd ever had. She didn't seem intimidated by him. She didn't stammer or tremble when she spoke to him. And worst of all, she didn't take his rules seriously. Now, Ethan was making the #1 mistake a man like him could make. He was paying attention to her. Over the past few hours, he'd caught himself looking for her, even when he hadn't meant to. When he walked past the cafeteria, he saw her laughing with colleagues, and for no logical reason, it bothered him. During a meeting, he noticed that she bit her lip when she was concentrating, and for some inexplicable reason, his brain filed that information away, like it mattered. To his absolute frustration, he had also discovered something new. Natalie talked to herself when she was alone. Earlier that day, he had seen her at her desk, typing something into her computer while muttering under her breath. Who designed these ridiculous spreadsheets? Were they created just to torture assistants? She sighed, then mumbled to herself again. If I mess this up, I bet he'll glare at me like I just ruined his entire life. Ethan had raised an eyebrow. Was she talking about him? He shouldn't be noticing these things. He shouldn't care. But he did. And then it happened. Natalie made a mistake. It was just a minor formatting error in the financial report. Nothing catastrophic, but it was enough to catch his attention. He picked up the paper, scanned the mistake, then pressed the intercom button. Natalie, in my office, now. Silence on the other end. Then, after a few seconds, he heard a hesitant voice crackled through the intercom. You mean right now? Like, right now? Ethan closed his eyes, feeling his patience slip away. That's what I said. 2 minutes later, Natalie walked into his office, looking only mildly annoyed. If you summon me like that over the intercom again, I will have a mini heart attack, she muttered. Ethan didn't acknowledge the comment. Instead, he silently held up the report, pointed at the mistake, and stared at her. What is this? Natalie tilted her head, frowning. A piece of paper? Ethan exhaled sharply. What's wrong with this piece of paper? She took the sheet from him and scanned it. After a pause, she sighed in surrender. Okay, fine, I forgot to align the columns in the second chart. She met his eyes. But Mr. Lancaster, let's be honest, has anyone ever died from a misaligned table? Ethan didn't react. If I wanted chaos, I'd start a tech company and wear flip-flops to work, she continued. But no, I have standards. She studied him for a second, then smirked. So, you don't wear flip-flops even at home? Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, officially running out of patience. Natalie, all right. She lifted her hands in surrender. I'll fix it. No more rebellious spreadsheets, I promise. She turned to leave. But just before she reached the door, do you always talk to yourself? Natalie froze. Slowly, she turned back around. What? Ethan remained expressionless. I saw you earlier, at your desk, mumbling to yourself. Do you do that often? Her eyes widened. You saw that? Yes. Natalie covered her face with both hands. Oh no. Ethan frowned. Why is that a problem? Because I try to seem at least somewhat normal, she groaned. And now you know my fatal flaw. Talking to yourself is a fatal flaw? Isn't it? Ethan studied her for a moment. I don't have time to mess with people, Carter. You are a billionaire CEO, she pointed out, crossing her arms. Ethan sighed. Exactly. She stared at him, then burst into laughter. And that was when Ethan realized something deeply unsettling. He felt comfortable. Natalie didn't seem intimidated by him. She didn't treat him like some untouchable figure. And without realizing it, he was starting to like that. But he couldn't allow it. If this continued, he would lose control. And Ethan Lancaster never lost control. Ever. Ethan Lancaster didn't like distractions. His world had always been structured, meticulous, every detail planned to eliminate the unexpected. But lately, nothing felt in place. And the reason? Natalie Carter. Ever since she broke his rules, he'd caught himself acting differently, noticing things he shouldn't notice, like the way she furrowed her brow when concentrating, or how she absent-mindedly played with her bracelet while reading a document. This had to stop. Yet no matter how much he wanted to keep his routine intact, one thing unsettled him more than anything else. The touch. For 20 years he had avoided any physical contact with women. The idea of someone crossing that boundary had always made him tense, uncomfortable. But then Natalie appeared, and nothing happened. No discomfort, no disgust, no need to pull away immediately. That thought tormented him more than he wanted to admit. He shouldn't be thinking about this. He should be focusing on work. But as he sat at his desk, absently twirling a gold pen in his fingers, trying to... Ethan stared at the multi-million-dollar contract in front of him, but his mind refused to focus. Instead, it dragged him back to a past he had spent years trying to erase. 16 years ago. Ethan Lancaster wasn't yet the financial mogul he was today. Back then, he was just a young heir trying to prove his worth in a world dominated by giants. And like any ambitious young man, he had believed in love. His heart had belonged to Amelia Wright, a woman with a sweet smile and captivating eyes. He had given himself to that relationship completely, believing she was his partner, his confidant, his future wife. Until the day he discovered the truth. She didn't love him. She loved his money, his status, his influence. And when someone more powerful came along, she left without a second thought. The breakup hadn't just been painful. It had been humiliating. Ethan could still remember the scene as if it happened yesterday. Amelia holding his hands, her expression unreadable as she delivered the final blow in the coldest voice imaginable. You were never enough. Those words had cut through him like a blade. And in that moment, something inside him had snapped. That was the day he realized human touch could deceive, that affection could be fake, that closeness could be a trap. So he built his rule, he distanced himself, he put up walls, he stopped trusting, stopped allowing himself any kind of vulnerability. His relationships became superficial, purely strategic, and for 16 years it had worked. Until Natalie Carter. Ethan blinked a few times, snapping back to the present. His grip on his pen was so tight his knuckles had turned white. His heart was pounding faster than usual. This had to stop. He would not allow a simple assistant to shake everything he had spent years building. If Natalie had somehow managed to break through his barriers, then he would reinforce them. Stronger than ever. No more casual moments. No more proximity. No more touching. Determined, he stood up and strode toward the door. This needed to end. Now. Natalie was sitting at her desk, casually chewing on a granola bar while reviewing a document on her computer. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until she felt it. A pair of eyes practically burning into her. She looked up and nearly choked. Ethan Lancaster stood in front of her, arms crossed, his expression so serious it could have frozen an entire boardroom. Mr. Lancaster, from now on, he cut in, we will keep our relationship strictly professional. Natalie blinked. Wait, wasn't that already obvious? Ethan remained firm. No jokes, no touching, no unnecessary proximity. She stared at him, completely baffled. Sorry, boss, but unnecessary proximity? We barely talk outside of work. Ethan said nothing. Natalie narrowed her eyes. Wait, what do you think I'm doing? Trying to seduce you? He hadn't expected that response. I didn't say that, he replied stiffly. But you are acting like I'm some kind of threat to your existence, she pointed out. Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it. Because deep down she was right. He was overreacting, but he had to react this way. It was the only way to regain control. Just follow the rules, he said firmly. Natalie narrowed her eyes, but she didn't. Natalie didn't argue. All right, boss, whatever you say. She went back to typing, giving him no further attention. Ethan stood there for a few more seconds. For some reason, the idea of Natalie not paying attention to him anymore bothered him deeply. Before he could do something foolish, he turned and left. The next day, Natalie decided to keep her distance. If Ethan Lancaster wanted cold professionalism, then cold professionalism was exactly what he would get. She handed him reports, kept their conversations strictly formal, and didn't interact beyond what was absolutely necessary. But to her surprise, he seemed irritated by it. Throughout the day, she noticed fleeting glances, serious expressions, subtle signs of frustration. And then, something unexpected happened. Late in the afternoon, Ethan called her into his office. Natalie walked in and immediately noticed something unusual. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, one of which he handed to her. Here. She raised an eyebrow. You bought me coffee? Ethan looked away. The barista made a mistake. I grabbed it by accident. She stared at him. Oh, really? Right? Because baristas mix up 2 identical coffees for the same person all the time, she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. He didn't respond. Natalie suppressed a smile. Ethan Lancaster was trying to make amends in his own rigid, awkward way. And maybe, just maybe, he was more confused than he let on. That only made things even more interesting. That night, Ethan Lancaster realized something far worse than his issues with touch. No matter how much he tried to avoid it, Natalie Carter was already in his head, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Ethan had never liked social events. Gala dinners, business receptions, charity parties. It was always the same people, the same fake smiles, the same superficial conversations. But as CEO of Lancaster Enterprises, his presence was expected. Avoiding these events would only lead to unnecessary speculation. Tonight, he had to attend a charity auction, an event filled with business executives, investors, and socialites pretending to care about noble causes, while competing to see who could spend the most money on auctioned items. And to make matters worse, he needed to bring a date. Traditionally, CEOs of major corporations attended these events with a companion, a business associate, a fiancé, an influential friend. In Ethan's case, all of those options were equally irritating. And then, without thinking too much, he made an impulsive decision. Natalie. She looked up from her computer, surprised. Yes? Ethan took a deep breath. I have a charity event tonight. I need a date. You're coming with me. Natalie blinked a few times, confused. Excuse me? It's a charity auction, simple event. You just need to be there, remain discreet, and represent the company by my side. Natalie crossed her arms, studying him. So let me get this straight. She tilted her head. You've spent the past few days making it very clear that you don't want unnecessary closeness. And now, you want me to go to an event with you? Ethan kept his posture firm. Yes. She let out an exaggerated sigh. Mr. Lancaster, I don't know if you've noticed, but you are sending some very mixed signals. Ethan exhaled sharply. Just accept it, Carter. It'll be better than taking. Anyone else? Natalie raised an eyebrow. Wow, thanks for the enthusiasm. Ethan ignored the sarcasm and turned back to his computer screen. Dress appropriately. I'll pick you up at 7. She opened her mouth to reply, then gave up. If he wanted to take her to the event, who was she to refuse? At exactly 7 p.m., Natalie was ready. Unlike her usual casual look at the office, tonight, she was stunning. A sleek black dress hugged her figure with effortless elegance, the thin straps highlighting her collarbones, the flowing fabric moving gracefully with every step. It was nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect. Her hair, normally tied up in a messy bun, now cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders. When Ethan arrived, dressed in a flawless black tuxedo, he paused for a second when he saw her. Just for a second. Natalie caught it. Raising an eyebrow, she smirked. Is there a problem? Ethan blinked, quickly masking whatever had just flickered across his face. None. Let's go. Minutes later, they arrived at the luxurious event hall. The atmosphere was sophisticated. Glittering chandeliers, the soft hum of classical music, waiters elegantly balancing trays of champagne. Natalie glanced around, immediately noticing how many eyes were on Ethan. You seem pretty popular here, she mused. Popular isn't the right word. Oh, right. You're the mysterious CEO who doesn't touch women. I bet half these people are trying to figure out how someone convinced you to bring a date." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Please watch your words." She smiled playfully. "But where's the fun in that?" As they spoke, guests began approaching Ethan to greet him. He maintained his usual composed demeanor, responding politely but distantly. Natalie, however, quickly noticed an unwelcome presence. A tall, blonde woman with sharp eyes was making her way toward them. Her red dress stood out against her fair skin. Her smile was calculated. "Henry." The way she said his name was cold, familiar. Ethan nodded. "Amelia." Natalie instantly felt the shift in the air. So this was Amelia Wright, the woman who had shattered Ethan Lancaster years ago, and judging by the way she was looking at him, their story was far from forgotten. "I'm surprised to see you here with a date," Amelia said smoothly, her gaze flicking toward Natalie. Natalie saw an opportunity. Before Ethan could respond, she casually slipped her arm through his and smiled. "Oh, he's a gentleman. He'd never let me come alone." Ethan stiffened. Amelia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "Is that so?" "Well," she added, "Ethan has always been reserved." Natalie tilted her head. Maybe he was just waiting for the right person to break that reserve. A sharp silence followed. Amelia studied her but didn't respond. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Ethan let out a heavy sigh. "That was unnecessary." Natalie shrugged. "I refuse to let an ex downplay my presence." He shot her a look. "You enjoy causing trouble, don't you?" She smirked. "Let's just say I'm good at leveling the playing field." Ethan watched her for a few seconds longer than he should have. There was something different about her. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't intimidated. And for the first time that night, he realized maybe having her by his side wasn't so bad. Hours later, when they finally left the event, Natalie was exhausted. Sinking into the car seat, she let out a long sigh. That was more exhausting than a full day at the office. Ethan simply drove in silence. She watched him for a moment. "So, was the event a success?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, the company's presence was well received." Natalie smiled. "And what about me? Did I pass as a formal event companion?" Ethan glanced at her briefly before turning his focus back to the road. "You were tolerable." She laughed. "Is that the closest thing to a compliment I'm going to get?" He didn't answer. But for the first time that night, a faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered across his face. Natalie noticed, and she liked what she saw. When they reached the entrance of her building, she turned to him before stepping out. "Thanks for taking me." Ethan nodded. "Good night, Carter." She smiled, then got out of the car. As he watched the door of the building close behind her, he felt something strange. He should have been relieved that the night was over, but somehow he wasn't. And that, more than anything else, left him completely confused. Ethan Lancaster couldn't sleep. The clock read 2:43 a.m. Yet he was still lying in the darkness of his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, as if the answer to his frustrations was hidden there. But he knew exactly what was bothering him. Natalie Carter. The night at the event had been meant as a simple formality. He was supposed to take her, fulfill his social obligation, and move on without thinking about it again. But instead, his mind refused to erase the image of her. The way she smiled when she teased Amelia, the way her black dress flowed as she walked through the ballroom, the way she had held his arm without hesitation, without fear, without the caution that every other woman showed around him. And worst of all, he hadn't felt the need to pull away. That terrified him. For years, Ethan had lived in self-imposed isolation. Human touch was something he avoided, something that made him uncomfortable, sometimes even repulsed. But Natalie didn't affect him the same way, and that was unacceptable. He shut his eyes tightly, trying to push the thoughts away. But every time he tried to block them out, they came back stronger. Frustrated, he got up and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. Maybe it was just a fleeting distraction. Something meaningless. He just needed to stick to his routine and ignore any thoughts about Natalie. That was all. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office at his usual time. He strode through the lobby without looking to the sides, just like he did every day. Employees straightened up as he passed, and no one dared to interrupt his path. But then, his eyes found her. Natalie was sitting at her desk, finishing her coffee, laughing at something Max Turner had said. And that laugh, something inside him twisted. Without realizing it, his steps slowed. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Max noticed. The head of finance gave Ethan an amused look, as if he knew exactly what was going on. "Good morning, Mr. Lancaster," Max greeted him, his tone carrying a hint of teasing. Ethan hardened his expression and kept walking, ignoring the remark. Natalie turned to him, holding a folder of documents. "Good morning, boss. Ready for another intense day of spreadsheets and meetings?" He stopped next to her desk, eyes flicking to the folder in her hands. "Is that the report?" "Right here," Natalie said, extending the folder to him. Ethan hesitated for half a second before taking it. The memory of their last touch was still fresh in his mind. But to his surprise, Natalie didn't let go right away. She held the folder firmly, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Are you okay?" The question caught him off guard. "What? You seem off today." He kept his expression neutral and pulled the folder from her hands with more force than necessary. "I'm perfectly fine." Natalie narrowed her eyes, unconvinced. "If you say so." She turned her attention back to her computer, but Ethan stood there for a second longer than he should have. Then, without another word, he turned and walked into his office, trying to ignore the fact that Natalie Carter could see right through him. The day dragged on, slow, frustrating. Ethan tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the past few days. He needed to snap out of this. She was just an assistant, an employee like any other. So why couldn't he stop noticing every little detail about her? By the end of the afternoon, he decided to do something to regain control. "Natalie, my office." When she walked in, she looked completely at ease, as if she wasn't dealing with one of the most feared CEOs in the country. "Go ahead," she said, casually leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. Ethan took a deep breath. "From now on, I want to keep all interactions strictly professional. No unnecessary conversations, no jokes." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" "Yes." She tilted her head, studying him. "So I assume that also means you'll stop staring at me all the time, right?" Ethan stiffened. "I don't stare at you." Natalie flashed a mischievous smile. "Oh, so it's just a coincidence that every time I look up, your eyes are already on me?" He kept his stance firm. "You're mistaken." She laughed. "If you say so, boss." She turned to leave, and Ethan felt something tighten inside him. Before he could stop himself, the words left his mouth. "Are you free for dinner tonight?" Natalie stopped. Slowly, she turned back around, her eyes slightly wide. "Wait, what?" Ethan cleared his throat. "Dinner. With me." Natalie blinked a few times. "Is this a joke?" "No." She studied him for a second. "Then, and here I thought you didn't want unnecessary conversations. It's a business dinner." "Of course it is," she smirked, and that was the moment Ethan realized he had already lost this battle. 2 hours later, Ethan and Natalie were seated in an elegant restaurant. Natalie glanced at the menu, pretending to be impressed. "Wow, even the prices here seem arrogant." Ethan didn't respond. "So is this how you always invite someone to dinner?" she continued. "No explanation, no warning." He set the menu down. "I figured you wouldn't say no," she laughed. "And I didn't. I'm just surprised." The waiter arrived, took their orders, and once he walked away, Natalie leaned slightly over the table. "Why did you bring me here, Ethan?" He hesitated. "I told you, it's a business dinner." "Liar." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What? You didn't bring me here for business," she said smoothly. "You're testing something." Ethan went completely still. Natalie smiled. "I saw your face at the event last night. You're trying to figure out what changed." She rested her chin on her hand, studying him closely. "What happened to you?" Ethan didn't answer, because, for the first time, he wasn't sure he knew. For the first time, Ethan didn't have an answer, and worse, he wasn't sure if he wanted one. When the night ended, Ethan drove Natalie home. He parked the car, but neither of them moved. Silence filled the space between them. Natalie smiled. "I'll admit, that was a nice dinner." Ethan kept his eyes on the steering wheel. "Natalie," she looked at him. "Yes?" There was a moment of hesitation. Then finally, he asked the question that had been circling in his mind for days. "What did you do to me?" Natalie froze. Then, a small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. "Nothing." She opened the door and stepped out. Ethan sat there alone, her answer echoing in his mind. But he knew. No matter how much she insisted that she hadn't done anything, the truth was much simpler. Natalie Carter had changed everything. And now, he had no idea what to do about it. Ethan Lancaster had never felt so out of control. In the days following the dinner, he tried everything to get back to his usual routine, to ignore the constant thoughts about Natalie Carter. But with each passing day, it became painfully obvious. Something inside him had shifted. And the problem was, he had no idea how to deal with it. Before, everything had been simple. He arrived at the office, reviewed reports, closed deals, and left, without caring about anyone beyond what was necessary. Now, he found himself looking for Natalie in the hallways, catching the sound of her laughter, sensing her presence before even seeing her. And worse, whenever she got close, his body reacted in a way it never had before. His heartbeat quickened, his breathing subtly changed. He noticed little details about her, things he never would have before. That's when he realized how dangerous this was. Natalie Carter was becoming a distraction, and he couldn't afford distractions. He needed to fix this before it was too late. By mid-afternoon, Ethan was in the conference room reviewing a contract. When he heard it, a loud laugh from outside. Natalie, he knew it was her before even looking. Her laughter was light, spontaneous, full of life. It didn't match the cold, serious atmosphere of the office. And yet, somehow, it made everything feel less monotonous. His eyes flicked toward the glass wall. She was standing there, talking to Max Turner. And it bothered him more than it should have. Max was leaning slightly toward her, saying something that made her laugh again. Ethan clenched his jaw. Why the hell was he feeling this? Jealousy? Impossible. He never got jealous. Ever. And yet, there he was, watching Max Turner, and feeling a growing irritation that made no sense. Then, before he even realized what he was doing, he was on his feet, walking straight toward them. Natalie? His voice came out harsher than he intended. She turned to him, smiling. But the moment she saw his expression, it faded. Yes, boss? I need to talk to you, now. Max raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his eyes, as if he knew exactly what was happening. Well, I guess that's my cue to leave. He smirked. It was a pleasure talking to you, Natalie. Then he winked at her and walked away. Ethan hated that. Natalie crossed her arms. What's the problem? He didn't answer right away, because he had no idea what to say. He had called her over on impulse without even having a real reason. Natalie tilted her head. Ethan, are you okay? Ethan blinked, as if only now realizing. Ethan blinked, and suddenly, he realized how ridiculous he was acting. Letting out a heavy sigh, frustrated with himself, he muttered, Forget it. Get back to work. He turned to leave, but then he felt it. A light touch on his wrist, soft, barely there. But it was enough to make him freeze. His eyes dropped to where her hand rested against his skin. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Ethan, Natalie said, her voice softer this time. Can you be honest with me? What's going on? He couldn't tell her. Because the truth was, he didn't even know. So he did what he did best. He pulled away. Nothing. Get back to work. And with that, he walked off without looking back. But he knew he had already lost this battle, because her touch was still burning on his skin. In the days that followed, Ethan did everything he could to avoid Natalie. He started delegating more tasks to his team, avoided walking past her department, even forced himself not to look when he knew she was nearby. But none of it worked, because the more he tried to avoid her, the more she seemed to be everywhere. He stepped into the elevator. Natalie was there. He went to grab coffee. Natalie was already at the cafe. He stayed late at the office. Natalie was leaving at the same time. It was as if the universe was having fun at his expense. And then, one day, she confronted him. A sharp knock on his office door. Then, before he could respond, Natalie walked in. Ethan wasn't surprised. He had known this was coming. She shut the door behind her and crossed her arms. Enough, Ethan. What's going on? He kept his posture firm. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you don't? She scoffed. Then why have you been avoiding me? He didn't answer. Natalie let out an exasperated sigh. If this is about that night at dinner, just say it. Did I do something wrong? No. Then why are you acting like I'm some kind of threat? Ethan ran a hand over his face, feeling exhaustion creep in. Natalie, it's nothing. Just forget it. She studied him for a few seconds. Then suddenly, a knowing smile curved her lips. "Ethan, are you afraid of me?" His eyes snapped up to meet hers. "Don't be ridiculous." "Then prove it." She stepped closer. Ethan didn't move. "If you really feel nothing," she murmured, "then there's no reason to be uncomfortable, right?" She took another step. His heartbeat sped up. Then she raised her hand and lightly touched his wrist. The touch was gentle, but it hit Ethan like a shockwave. Natalie smiled. "See?" she whispered. "You're nervous." Ethan immediately pulled away. "That means nothing." "Of course not," she teased, laughing. "You're just pale as a sheet and looking like a teenager who just got kissed for the first time." He didn't find it funny. "Natalie, stop this." "No," she said simply, "because I know there's something here." She studied him closely. "And I'm going to figure out what it is." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't, because at that moment, he realized she was right. There was something there. Something he wasn't ready to face, and no matter how much he tried to deny it, he knew he wouldn't be able to avoid it for much longer. Ethan Lancaster was reaching his limit. For days, he had tried everything to ignore the fact that Natalie Carter was becoming his biggest distraction, but nothing worked. Avoiding her only made the urge to look at her stronger. Pretending not, trying to act like he didn't care, only made him more irritated. And now, to make things worse, she knew. Natalie knew something had changed in him, and that made her an even bigger problem. She had started pushing him, testing the boundaries he had spent years reinforcing, touching his wrist without hesitation, teasing his discomfort, making him feel things he shouldn't feel. He didn't want to give her that power, but at the same time, he couldn't pretend he wasn't affected anymore. And then came the final blow. That night, Ethan had a corporate event on the rooftop of one of the city's most luxurious hotels. He knew Natalie would be there. Her job required it. But he wasn't prepared for what he saw the moment he arrived. His eyes immediately found her. She wore a deep wine-colored dress, elegant, perfectly fitted, with an open-back design that revealed just enough. Her hair fell in soft waves, and the smile she gave those around her was bright, effortless, too easy. Ethan hated the way he felt when he saw her like that. He didn't know exactly what it was, but if he had to describe it, it felt like possessiveness. And that was dangerous. Very dangerous. The night dragged on. Ethan tried to keep his composure, greeting investors, discussing business, avoiding Natalie whenever possible. But every time he glanced across the room, there she was, laughing, talking to someone, shining, like she was meant to be the center of attention. And then he saw something that crossed the line. Natalie was at the bar, talking to a man Ethan knew well. Nathan Carter, a charming businessman, smooth, well known for his flirtatious ways and never missing an opportunity with a beautiful woman. Ethan saw the exact moment Nathan placed his hand on Natalie's waist. Something inside him snapped. Before he even thought about what he was doing, he was moving, crossing the room quickly. Natalie was laughing at something Nathan had said when she felt a presence beside her. Before she could react, Ethan gripped her arm, firm, not rough. She turned to him, startled. "Ethan?" Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Well, if it isn't Ethan Lancaster," he said smoothly. "Are you interrupting something?" Ethan ignored the comment, his eyes locked on Natalie. "I need to talk to you, now." She blinked, confused. "We're in the middle of a conversation. Can it wait a minute?" Ethan didn't answer. He just tightened his hold, slightly, just enough for her to feel the tension in his grip. Nathan chuckled, as if he understood everything. "Relax, Ethan," he said, smirking. "I wasn't going to steal your girl." Natalie's eyes widened. "What, no?" But Ethan was already pulling her away. He led her to a more secluded area of the rooftop, away from prying eyes. The moment they stopped, Natalie yanked her arm free and crossed her arms. "What is your problem?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. "He was touching you." She blinked. "So what? It was just a casual touch." His eyes met hers, unwavering. "I didn't like it." Natalie was speechless for a moment. Then, slowly, a teasing smile formed on her lips. "Ethan," she murmured, voice full of amusement. "Are you jealous?" He swallowed hard. "No." "Then what's the reason for all of this?" He had no answer. Natalie took a step closer. "Tell me the truth." Ethan could smell her. The closeness was suffocating, overwhelming. "There is no truth," he said. voice low. She tilted her head, studying him. So if I did it again with another man, you wouldn't care? Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. Then, before he could stop himself, Ethan gripped the back of her neck and kissed her. It was fast, intense, no hesitation. Natalie froze for a second. Then she kissed him back, grabbing him by the lapels of his jacket. The world around them disappeared. The noise of the party faded. All that existed was this, their touch, their breath, each other. But Ethan was the one to pull away first. Slowly, he opened his eyes and saw Natalie staring at him, surprised, breathless. And that's when reality hit him. This should never have happened, he said, his tone cold. Natalie blinked. What? He took a step back. It was a mistake. Her expression shifted. Slowly, she crossed her arms, her gaze locked onto his. So you kissed me like that, and now you decide it was a mistake? Ethan didn't know what to say. He could still taste her on his lips. His body still burned where she had touched him. But he couldn't let this go any further. He wouldn't let her have that kind of power over him. Forget it, he said, forcing his voice to stay cold. Natalie let out a sarcastic laugh. Ethan, you are unbelievable. He turned to leave. But before he could take more than 2 steps, he felt her hand on his arm again. Don't run. He stopped, but he didn't look at her. She stepped closer. You kissed me, Ethan. You pulled me in, and now you want to pretend it didn't happen? Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to regain control. Then, without turning around, he said the only thing that could push her away. It was just an impulse, that's all. Natalie stood still. The tension in her silence was suffocating. Then, she let go of his arm. All right? Her voice was calm, steady. If that's how you want to play this, then we'll play it that way. There was no anger in her tone, only determination. And in that moment, Ethan knew he hadn't pushed her away. If anything, he had just made things even more dangerous. And now, he had nowhere left to run. Ethan Lancaster was losing control. In the days following the kiss, he did everything in his power to pretend it never happened. He ignored Natalie at the office, buried himself in meetings, contracts, anything to keep his mind occupied. Created even more professional distance. Refused to let their eyes meet for more than a few seconds. But none of it worked. Because every time he closed his eyes, he could still taste her on his lips. Every time he heard her laugh somewhere in the office, he remembered the warmth of her body against his. And every time she walked past him, without even glancing his way, something tightened in his chest. She was playing dirty. She didn't confront him, didn't demand explanations, didn't ask questions. She simply acted as if he didn't exist. And it was killing him a little more each day. By Friday night, Ethan decided he needed to get out. He wasn't much of a drinker, but tonight, he didn't want to think. So he went to an upscale bar in the city center. A discreet place where CEOs and executives came to unwind after exhausting weeks. He ordered a whiskey, sat in the farthest corner of the room, glass in hand, mind filled with thoughts he shouldn't be having. But then, things got worse. Because the moment he leaned back in his chair to take a sip, he saw her, Natalie Carter, walking into the bar, and she wasn't alone. Beside her, laughing, looking completely at ease, was Max Turner. Ethan felt his blood boil. He didn't know what was worse, the fact that she was here, or the fact that Ethan didn't know what was worse, the fact that Natalie was at the same bar as him, or the fact that she was with another man. Worse yet, Max. Max was sharp. He knew exactly what he was doing. And no matter how much Ethan tried to pretend he didn't care, he did. He hated the idea of Natalie with any other man. She hadn't seen him yet. But then, as if she could feel his gaze, she lifted her eyes in his direction. A moment of silence. Their eyes met. Ethan's body went rigid. Natalie held the eye contact for a brief moment. Then she smiled and turned back to Max, as if Ethan wasn't even there. His grip tightened around his glass. She was playing against him, and she was winning. 10 minutes later, Ethan had had enough. He wasn't going to sit there pretending not to care while Natalie laughed and talked with Max as if he didn't exist. Before he could change his mind, he stood up and walked toward her. Max noticed him first. "Ah, Ethan, what are you doing here?" Ethan didn't respond. He looked straight at Natalie. "Can we talk?" She raised an eyebrow. "Now?" She looked amused by that. Sorry, but I'm busy. Ethan felt his patience slipping. 5 minutes, that's all I need. Natalie let out a dramatic sigh and glanced at Max. Do you mind? Max shrugged. As long as he doesn't kidnap you, go ahead. Natalie smiled and stood up. All right then, 5 minutes? Ethan grabbed her arm and led her to a quieter corner of the bar. Natalie turned to him, crossing her arms. Well, she said, what was so important? Ethan didn't know where to start. He looked at her, trying to find the right words, trying not to sound as desperate as he felt. But then, Natalie tilted her head and smiled. Ethan, are you jealous? It was like an electric shock ran through him. He couldn't deny it, but he couldn't admit it either. Don't be ridiculous. She raised an eyebrow. Then why are you here? Pulling me away from my date? His fists clenched. This is not a date. Oh, and you get to decide who I go out with now? Ethan didn't answer. Natalie took a step closer. Tell me the truth, Ethan. What do you want from me? He didn't know, or rather, he did, but he couldn't say it. So instead of speaking, he acted. Before he could stop himself, he cupped the back of her neck and kissed her. This was different from the first kiss. This wasn't an impulse. It was surrender. Natalie responded immediately, fisting the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer. Their lips moved together, their breaths mixed. The bar, the people, the world disappeared. Only they existed. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan saw it in her eyes. Nothing would ever be the same. Is this still a mistake? Natalie asked, breathless. He ran a hand over his face, frustrated with himself. Yes, she laughed. Well, I don't think so. Ethan didn't know what to do anymore. But he knew one thing. He couldn't run from this any longer. Ethan Lancaster had never been this out of control. He had spent his entire life avoiding emotions, keeping himself distant from anything that could threaten his self-control. But now, looking at Natalie Carter, still tasting her on his lips, he knew he had completely lost this battle. And then, without thinking, without hesitation, without barriers, he kissed her again. No tension, no resistance. There was only him and her, and the undeniable desire they could no longer ignore. Natalie matched his intensity. She clutched his shirt tightly, as if she had no intention of letting go, as if she had finally gotten what she wanted all along. When they pulled apart breathless, Ethan couldn't say a word. He didn't need to. Natalie smiled. Finally, something twisted inside him. He no longer knew what was right or wrong, but he knew one thing. He couldn't fight this anymore. In the days that followed, everything changed. Ethan tried to act as if nothing had happened, tried to keep his usual professional stance, tried to show nothing, but for the first time, Natalie wouldn't let him. She was everywhere. At the office, she looked at him with that teasing smile. In the hallways, she walked just a little too close. During meetings, she stared at him as if she knew exactly what he was trying to hide. And Ethan realized he was at a disadvantage. Because unlike him, Natalie wasn't afraid to admit what she wanted, and with each passing day, he was giving in. On Friday morning, Ethan arrived at his office and found a coffee on his desk. He frowned. What is this? Natalie, sitting at her desk, smiled. A coffee. Why? Because I wanted to. He looked at her, trying to make sense of the gesture, but Natalie just kept smiling. And then Ethan realized he was smiling too. He couldn't deny it anymore. She affected him in a way no one ever had before, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to run from it anymore. That night, Ethan was in his apartment trying to work when his phone buzzed, a message. Natalie, I'm outside your building. Are you going to invite me up, or are you going to keep pretending nothing is happening? Ethan felt his heart race. He could ignore it. He could not respond, but he didn't want to. So he answered, Ethan, come up. Minutes later, Natalie stood in front of him. She was dressed casually, jeans and a black top. But to Ethan, she had never looked more beautiful. She crossed her arms, smiling. You're not that hard to break, you know? Ethan watched her in silence. And then, he did what he had wanted to do since the very first day. He pulled her close and kissed her. This time, without fear, without hesitation. The kiss that had started as a spark turned into an uncontrollable fire. Ethan pulled Natalie closer, feeling the warmth of her body against his. His hands explored the curve of her back as he finally allowed himself to feel everything he had been denying. And Natalie, she didn't hold back. She had wanted him for a long time, and now there were no more barriers. His apartment was silent, but the air between them was charged. Ethan knew he should stop, but he couldn't. The feel of her skin beneath his fingertips, her scent, the way her lips fit perfectly against his. It was all too intense. But then, the moment Natalie slid her hands over his chest, trying to undo the buttons of his shirt, he pulled back. It was automatic, instinctive. He stepped away, as if he had just been shocked. Natalie looked at him, confused. "What's wrong?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, taking a deep breath, trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Natalie crossed her arms, studying him. "Ethan, do you want me to leave?" And the thought of her walking away, left an odd emptiness in his chest. He didn't want her to go, but he also didn't know how to move forward. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. "I think this was a mistake." Natalie froze. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then she laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. "A mistake?" she echoed. "Seriously, Ethan?" He didn't respond. Natalie shook her head, disappointed. "You know what? I should have expected this." She exhaled sharply. "You always do this, don't you? The moment something feels out of your control, you push it away." Ethan didn't deny it, because she was right. Natalie grabbed her bag and headed for the door. But just before leaving, she glanced over her shoulder. "You can't run from this forever, Ethan." And then, she was gone. Ethan stood there, alone, but the echo of her presence still filled the apartment, and for the first time, he felt truly lost. In the days that followed, Ethan buried himself in work. If he had been reserved before, now he was practically a ghost in his own office. He avoided Natalie at all costs. If he stepped into the elevator and saw her there, he walked out before the doors closed. If she walked into the conference room, he found a reason to leave before they could be alone. But he knew this couldn't last forever, and he was right. It was late at night when she finally cornered him. Ethan was leaving the office when he saw her, standing next to his car, waiting, arms crossed, determination written all over her face. He considered turning back inside, but he knew she wouldn't let this go easily. With a sigh, he walked toward her. "Natalie, what are you doing here?" "I'm waiting for you to stop acting like an idiot." His expression hardened. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," she shot back. "You're just making it complicated." Ethan unlocked the car, but before he could open the door, Natalie placed her hand over his. The touch was soft but electric. He froze. She stepped closer. "Tell me the truth, Ethan." He tried to pull away, but she held firm. "Do you want me? Yes or no?" Ethan shut his eyes. Then he told the truth. "Yes." "Natalie, then stop running." He looked at her. "What if I mess this up?" She laughed. "You already are." Ethan knew she was right, and in that moment, he made his decision. He let out a heavy breath. Then he pulled her into a kiss. This time, he didn't pull back. No fear, no hesitation, no intention of letting her go. This time, Ethan didn't retreat. He held Natalie firmly, deepening the kiss with all the intensity he had been trying to deny. There were no more walls, no more excuses, just them, finally giving in to the inevitable. Natalie responded without hesitation, gripping the collar of his shirt, pulling him closer, as if she had finally gotten what she wanted from the very first day. Then, thunder rumbled in the sky. They pulled apart, just enough to realize the rain was coming. Natalie laughed, her hand still gripping his shirt. "Looks like the universe wants to make this scene even more dramatic." Ethan glanced up at the heavy clouds overhead. Then, he made a decision. "Get in the car." Natalie studied him for a moment. Then, she smiled and obeyed. The first few minutes inside the car were silent. Natalie kept her eyes on him, waiting for him to speak. Ethan, on the other hand, was still trying to process what he had just done. He had kissed her again, and this time, he couldn't pretend it was a mistake, because it wasn't. It was the most right thing he had done in years. Natalie leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "So, is this the part where you run again?" Ethan didn't look away. "No." Her smile was slow, teasing. "Good, because I was getting tired of that." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "I'm not good at this." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Good at what?" He hesitated. "Relationships." Natalie laughed. "Neither am I, but I don't think that's a problem." Ethan looked at her, searching for something, some kind of reassurance. What if I mess everything up? She met his gaze, unwavering. Then we fix it. Ethan had never met anyone like her. Someone who wasn't afraid, someone who didn't pull away. And for the first time, he wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could stop running too. In the days that followed, everything changed, and yet nothing changed. They were still Ethan Lancaster and Natalie Carter, boss and assistant, CEO and employee. But now, there was something more. Their glances lingered a little longer. Their touches were more frequent, even if subtle. And above all, there was an unspoken tension between them. Natalie loved testing his limits. Once, during a meeting, she deliberately dropped a pen near him. When she bent down to pick it up, she whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "You're looking at me." Ethan didn't react, but inside, he felt it. She challenged him constantly. And the worst part? He liked it. But Ethan still wasn't fully ready. He kept their relationship a secret, never talked about it, never did anything to make it official. And Natalie noticed, it was on a Friday night, while they were having dinner at his apartment, that she finally brought it up. "How long are we going to keep this up?" Ethan looked at her confused. "Keep what up?" Natalie put down her fork, crossing her arms. "You know what I mean. This, us. You act like we're together, but at the same time, you keep everything so quiet. It's like we're hiding a crime." Ethan didn't answer right away, because he knew she was right. But he didn't know how to change it. Natalie sighed. "Ethan, are you ashamed of me?" His eyes widened. "What? No. Then why does it feel like you're afraid to admit we're together?" Ethan ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "It's not that. I've never done this before." Natalie was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, she asked, "Are you afraid of losing me?" Ethan felt the weight of those words, because, yes, he was afraid. Afraid of getting attached, afraid of opening up, afraid of trusting someone, and being left behind again. Natalie reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, I'm not Amelia." He held his breath. She continued, "I'm not her. I won't walk away when things get hard, but you have to let me in." Ethan felt something crack inside him, because he wanted to believe her. But he wasn't sure if he could, and that terrified him. More than anything, in the days that followed, Ethan became even more distant, not intentionally, but because he was handling all of this the wrong way. And Natalie noticed. She didn't push him, but she didn't like it. And on a Wednesday night, everything finally exploded. Natalie was called into a meeting with Ethan and the company's other executives. Throughout the entire meeting, he barely looked at her, acted as if nothing had ever happened between them. And that was the last straw. As soon as the meeting ended, Natalie followed him into his office and shut the door behind her. Ethan turned around, surprised. "What is it?" Natalie didn't waste any time. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" He frowned. "What are you talking about? Do you want me? Yes or no?" He said nothing. She took a step closer. "Because if you don't, then tell me now. But if you do, then stop treating me like a stranger in front of everyone else." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He knew he had to make a choice, but he still wasn't ready. So he made a mistake. "Maybe it's best if we end this." Natalie froze. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was bitterness. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "Congratulations, Ethan. You got what you wanted." And then she was gone. This time, Ethan didn't stop her. And that was the biggest mistake of his life. Ethan Lancaster thought he was doing the right thing. He had spent years building walls around himself, protecting himself from anything that could make him lose control. But now, as he stared at the closed door where Natalie had just walked out, he knew. He had made a colossal mistake. He wanted to believe this was for the best, that keeping his distance was the most rational choice. But then came the silence, and for the first time in a long time, he realized just how unbearable that silence was. Natalie, on the other hand, didn't want to think about him. She was tired of waiting for Ethan to admit what he felt, tired of pretending everything was fine, when, in reality, it wasn't. So the next day, she simply moved on. Or at least she tried to. But ignoring Ethan wasn't easy. He was everywhere. in the office, in meetings, in the hallways, and every time she saw him, she felt his eyes on her. But this time, she didn't look back. She was determined to live her life without him. And Ethan didn't know how to handle that. In the days that followed, Ethan became a different man. On the surface, he was still the same ruthless, disciplined CEO. But inside, he was a mess. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat properly, and worst of all, he couldn't stop thinking about her. His apartment felt empty without her presence. The office felt cold without her teasing. And Ethan started to realize something terrifying. He no longer knew how to live without Natalie Carter, but Natalie wasn't going to wait for him. On Friday night, she went out with friends. Ethan only found out by chance, because he saw a picture of her on social media. She was at a bar, smiling, holding a colorful drink in her hand. And next to her, there was a man. Ethan couldn't breathe properly. This wasn't just jealousy. It was panic. Because for the first time, he realized that she could actually move on without him. And he wasn't ready for that. That same night, he went after her. He had never done anything so irrational in his entire life. But he didn't care. When he walked into the bar and saw Natalie, laughing, enjoying herself, he knew he had to do something. He couldn't let her go. So he walked straight toward her. Ethan walked straight to her. Natalie noticed him instantly, and she didn't hide her surprise. "What are you doing here?" Ethan didn't answer because he didn't know what to say. Then Natalie narrowed her eyes. "Oh, I see. You push me away. And now you show up, stalking me." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "I need to talk to you." Natalie let out a sharp laugh, crossing her arms. "No." Ethan froze. "Natalie, please." "Now you say please," she scoffed. "Where was that humility when you tossed me aside like I was a problem?" Ethan had no answer. Natalie took a deep breath and grabbed her purse. "You know what? Let's just get this over with. Say what you need to say, Ethan." He hesitated, but he knew he couldn't run anymore, so he said the only thing that mattered. "I love you." Natalie went still. Ethan had never felt so vulnerable in his life. "What?" she asked, like she wasn't sure she had heard him right. Ethan took a deep breath. "I love you." Natalie didn't say a word. Then she laughed, but it was nervous laughter. "Really?" she said, shaking her head. "Now you decide to tell me this?" Ethan's heart pounded. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but Natalie cut him off. "Ethan," she sighed, looking at him. "I waited so long to hear that." She paused. "But now, I don't know if I still want to." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Natalie smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "If you really love me, you'll have to prove it." And then she walked away. But this time, he knew he had to chase after her. Because if he didn't, he would lose her. Forever. Ethan Lancaster was not willing to lose Natalie Carter. He had made every mistake possible. Pushed her away, ran from his own feelings, refused to admit the truth. But now, after seeing her walk away, knowing she might actually be gone for good, he realized something terrifying. He didn't exist without her. Natalie Carter was the only thing in his life that made sense, and he was going to prove it. The next morning, Natalie was at her desk trying to focus on work when she heard a commotion, murmurs, whispers, people turning around, some holding up their phones as if they were recording something. She frowned. "What's going on?" she asked Max, who was staring down the hallway, stunned. He smirked. "I think your boss has lost his mind." Before she could ask, Ethan appeared, but not like usual. He wasn't wearing his perfectly tailored suit. He didn't look serious or intimidating. He was barefoot, holding a massive bouquet of flowers, and his suit was completely ruined. Natalie nearly choked on her coffee. Ethan looked nervous, clearly uncomfortable, but he kept walking, determined. He stopped right in front of her desk, and then he knelt down. The entire office froze. Natalie was speechless. Everyone held their breath, and then Ethan spoke. "Natalie Carter." He swallowed hard, looking like a man who had never been this vulnerable in his life. "I was an idiot. A complete, absolute, ridiculous idiot." Someone in the back muttered, "That's true." Ethan shot them a deadly glare, then turned back to Natalie. "I ran because I was scared. Because I've never felt anything like this before. Because you," he exhaled sharply, "you did something no one else ever has." Natalie still wasn't sure if this was real or if she had hit her head and was hallucinating. But Ethan kept going. "You made me feel." The entire room let out a collective sigh. Ethan took a deep breath. "And now, I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to spend another second without you. Because without you, nothing makes sense." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Natalie's eyes widened. Ethan opened it, and inside, a diamond engagement ring sparkled under the light. He gave her a nervous, lopsided smile. "So, Natalie Carter, will you marry me and put up with me for the rest of your life, even though I'm the most stubborn, difficult man on the planet?" The office erupted into murmurs. Someone laughed. Max whistled. Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. And then, something unexpected happened. She laughed, because this was so ridiculously perfect, so Ethan Lancaster, that she couldn't believe this was the same man who had spent so long running from her. She looked at him, kneeling there, and felt her heart overflow, so she gave the only possible answer. "Of course I'll marry you, you idiot." Ethan let out a relieved laugh. He took the ring and slid it onto her finger, and the moment she looked at him again, he kissed her. Right there, in the middle of the office, in front of everyone. And no one had ever seen Ethan Lancaster so happy. Months later, Natalie still couldn't believe it was real. She stood in front of the mirror, wearing a stunning wedding dress, trying to process the fact that in just a few minutes, she would become Ethan Lancaster's wife. His wife. If someone had told her this months ago, she would have laughed. But now, looking at her reflection, she knew that everything had happened exactly the way it was meant to. The door opened. Max stepped inside. "You ready?" Natalie took a deep breath, smiled, and nodded. More than ever. At the altar, Ethan stood, more nervous than he had ever been in any business meeting in his life. He had never liked ceremonies, never liked being the center of attention. But the moment he saw her walking down the aisle, he forgot how to breathe. She was perfect. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He knew this was what he wanted, what he had always wanted. She walked toward him, her smile radiant. And when she stopped by his side, Ethan took her hand and whispered, "You look absolutely stunning." Natalie smiled. "And you're sweating," he chuckled. And then, the wedding began. The vows were emotional. Natalie made Ethan laugh and cry at the same time. And when it was time to say "I do," Ethan didn't hesitate for even a second, because for the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain of what he wanted, and what he wanted was her. The reception was unforgettable. Max gave a speech that left half the guests laughing until they cried. Natalie dragged Ethan onto the dance floor, even though he insisted he didn't know how to dance. And at the end of the night, as they watched the fireworks light up the sky, Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace. "I never thought I'd be able to have this," he murmured. Natalie smiled against his chest. "Have what?" He looked into her eyes. "Someone like you." She kissed him gently. "Well, get used to it, because now you're stuck with me." Ethan smiled, because this time he didn't want to run. He only wanted to stay forever. What did you think of Ethan and Natalie's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with all our stories. And don't forget to check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the final screen.